All right, so this is the thing. What are your goals? You want health information, contact with your birth family members. I say members because it may not be that the birth parents are still living, but you certainly would meet up with other people that are related to you, especially when you go through DNA, learning the circumstances of your birth, your adoption, and learning information on your origins, your ethnicity. And then again, we mentioned having a budget. You need to think about that because you want to be sure you, okay, what happened here?
Is it moving?
I don't know how to do what I'm supposed to be doing. Can't we do this some other way? I clicked on that, nothing happened.
There.
Right, there it is. What am I clicking? The right?
The left.
The left
button.
Okay. So where do you start? Traditionally, you want to start if you have any records. Does your adopted family members? I'm giving this talk in the vein of you're the adopted person trying to find your roots. So you need to adapt the thinking to whatever your role is going to be. I don't assume that you know what your family members have. One of my friends, after the complete discovery of his birth parents' information, he opened an envelope he had at home that his sister had given him, and in there was the adoption document that should have been in the courthouse. He had never looked in the envelope that he had all these years since his adopted mother had died. He just thought it was the same piece of paper. So you got to be upfront with whoever's helping you. You've got to say, here's what I've got. I've talked to my aunts. I know what we know. Or here's what my adopted mother told me. And don't be cagey. Nothing should be off the table. And if you're the consultant, the genealogist, whoever's working with them, you say, I'm not working with you unless you come clean with everything that you have on the family. Now, one of my cousins thinks she's a private adoption. Well, I have a lawyer in Decatur who's an adoption lawyer. He said, that's ridiculous. There's no such thing as a private adoption for somebody born in the 1960s, because she still has to have a case file at the State Adoption Bureau. She won't approach them. Now, we found her birth mother through DNA, birth mother, the half sister, and all that. But the point is, this girl she's convoluted herself because she won't do the right thing. And I'm trying to teach y'all here how to do the right thing, no matter what anybody tells you and whatever roadblock they may throw up. They do not know what they're talking about. And I think we do here. And this is based on several people who have been successful in doing this who didn't know anything when they started. If your adopted parents are deceased, ask the living relatives in the family what they remember. I know my uncle told me I have two adopted first cousins, and he said, well, one of them was born in Decatur, one of them was born in New Orleans. And that's a good guide to let somebody know something that he told them. I'm not sure what he told his own children. All prior information, I said, just must be shared with your consultant, your research advisor, or your counselor. And I believe in counseling. If you're going to deal with somebody doing looking for the adopted story, you need to have somebody in there counseling the person about what they're going to expect at the end. Some people think it's going to be a kumbaya moment. Everybody's going to hug them and say, oh, we're so glad to see you. The reverse is true. Most everybody doesn't want to hear about you. My cousins, that children have shown up that are their children, the men especially, they don't want to know about it. So you're not going to have a happy moment. It's very rare. If the people are dead, you have a better chance of somebody coming forward and saying, oh, welcome to the family. I'll tell you all about your grandfather, your uncle, whoever. So don't be put off what people say, even your adopted parents. And in the end, DNA can verify quite a bit. Two paths to finding the birth parents' information. One, like I said, is to go through the state adoption agency in the state where you were adopted. It doesn't make any difference what any other state's doing. It all matters in the state where you were adopted. And I'm going to show you one example. One of my fraternity brothers was adopted in New Jersey. Get that in a minute. And then after you do the adoption agency story, you do the DNA. You can do the DNA simultaneously because you need to have both to be able to make sure what you learn is correct. Because just because you get something from the adoption bureau, as one of my cousins found out, the lady didn't know who the father was. And she wrote an entire 2-page story about this man who was not the father. And she, to this day, thinks that man is the father, even though my cousin has matched his birth father on DNA. Slam dunk. There's no question. Because his birth father had done a DNA test at Ancestry. And the birth mother, who he's now talked to, and now chats with him once a week or so, still can't say she ever met the birth father. And so, and the birth father claims he's never met her. So DNA has proved who they are, but in person, and I've actually had lunch with the birth father. Showed him the pictures. I never saw that girl. I said, well, you had a baby with her. I don't know how that came about. All right, the adoption records. They're sealed in most states. In Georgia, they've been sealed since around 1941. They differ from state to state, and what you can find out from each state is different. It only matters the state you're dealing with. We can look at all the other laws in the country and who's advocating for what, but it only matters in the state that the adoption took place. One of my case studies, she's born in 1930. She's 92. She claims she was born in New York City, but her adoption's in New Jersey. And to this day, she doesn't know why. I said, you need to go through the New Jersey Adoption Bureau. And if they'll produce it, whatever record they've got for you, she's never done that. She did DNA and was satisfied, but she never went back to New Jersey because she said she was born in New York. Doesn't matter. If the birth certificate says New Jersey, that's where you got to go. You can find out when other states' records were sealed, but it only matters the state you were adopted in and where your records are. So all the other stuff is just a nice lecture at a national genealogy conference. The adoption agency in the state. Oh, yes. Well, let me finish the lecture, and then you'll see. Each state's different. I'm going to show you what Georgia does. Okay. You got to contact the adoption agency. Now, one of my cousins, has been trying to call them. Well, every phone number she found online was wrong. When you look at the Georgia Adoption Bureau site, I'm going to show you in a second, you got to go online, you got to contact them and sign up online. So they don't even give you a phone number. So whatever she's been doing, that's why she's never gotten anything done, because she's on the wrong track and she won't admit it. Okay. In Georgia, you have several options. You can hire a researcher for around $300. And they will research the file and they will contact your birth family. One of my friends, or two of my friends, well, one of my friends actually found his birth mother and she was still alive. This was several years back, and he met her. And her other children told him mother's terminal cancer, and she died a month after he met her. He almost missed that opportunity. But of course, when he met his birth mother, she told him the whole story about what happened and all. So hiring a researcher is important, but it is around $300. You can obtain the non-identifying information. This is most critical. No matter where you go, you've got to get the non-identifying information or whatever the state offers you in the state of adoption, because this is what you're going to compare to the DNA results, because the lady who had the baby is going to put down most of her correct information. It doesn't give any names, but it says her age, her occupation, what her parents' occupations were, how many siblings she had, any health information. So that's the kind of stuff you want to know just to compare to what you learn through DNA or any other kind of information you got. And then there are other services they offer, like you can register and say, if anybody's looking for me, please put them in touch. And you may see if somebody's actually looking for you that's already registered. The law is different from state to state. This one guy that I'm going to show you next, he got his original birth certificate a few years ago. He was born in 1963 or 4 in New Jersey. He later learned that New Jersey changed the law in 2017. If you're an adopted person, you can prove it. They will send you your original birth certificate. Now, Larry got this with no counseling. So he calls me up, he sends me what he got. So what are you going to do when you're faced with your birth parents' names and you know nothing else? No counseling, no nothing. So I worked on it. And within a few hours, we found information on his birth father. He had a very unusual name, and the birth father had already died. And the birth mother's last name is Smith. Now, several years have gone by, let's say 5 years. So that day I called Larry up to ask him what had happened, because I tried to catch up with all my 10 case studies for this talk. And he said, well, I just never got back. He never did DNA. In other words, he didn't get back with me. He didn't get back with anybody. So Larry is still stuck. And of course, his birth mother's name is Smith. If he got the non-identifying information, he might learn more about her and find out whatever she put down, or he might just pay for a search. That's what I would advise. He's only got the money to pay for a search. Of course, he got no counseling, and he had no idea what to do. And if he hadn't known me, I don't know that he knew any other genealogists. And the biggest thing with him is he grew up in a very strong Jewish household. He's a very Jewish person, and his birth father is Italian Catholic. So that's a great contrast to realize your whole ethnicity is in another category. And I don't think he's ever checked with the adoption agency besides just getting his birth certificate. And that may be all New Jersey offers. The next slide just shows the New Jersey law went into effect in 2017, and that's what, I'm not sure how Larry learned about that, but the fact is that he did get his original birth certificate. So in Georgia, this is the website. It's on your handout. It's called the Georgia Adoption Reunion Registry. I think they started this about 1997 when Georgia changed the law and did allow people to have access to certain information. And you see the different things here. It's a bit faint. Are you the adopted person? Are you the birth parent? Are you a relative of the deceased? Are you a caseworker? Second column, adopted parents. Are you a sibling? Or are you the child of the deceased? Now, some people do approach me that it's their parent that was adopted. So Georgia gives you an option. I'm not sure what you can learn from that. It's very hard to do any of this if you're not the person and can register officially as the person. But there are people that are looking for a fairly recent adopted. One of my friends in Florida, her mother was adopted in 1925 in Bradenton, Florida. And she wouldn't go the right route either. She wouldn't, I'd say they're probably not sealed. She wouldn't listen to me anyway. She recently found her birth parents' names by some means. I'm not sure how she did it. So as you follow this as the adopted person, the next thing says, I'm an adopted person. You fill out the situation and you go from there. And then you follow the rules and you register. So you can pay for a search, which I said is $300 in Georgia, or you can just pay the $30 for the non-identifying information. If this matters to you folks, whoever you're helping, then pay for it and get moving. Because like I said, my friend DMS found his birth mother and only had a month before she died. So the point is, you're on thin ground with a lot of these people anyway. You need to go whole hog and finish this up if you're serious about it. And don't keep wishy-washing around. Oh, should I do this or not do this? And if you're helping somebody, you ought to encourage them to go ahead and do it. That's the way I look at it. Okay, so that's the next step. Then again, Georgia, the fee is for search is $300. You get no refund. The estimated may take as long as 6 months to contact the birth family if the birth parent is still living. It's always going to be the birth mother. Very few times do they show it the birth father, although the lady may tell you, and it could be in the records. If they give you the results, they let you know whether the person wants to be contacted or not, and they could refuse. In several cases, they have refused. And their success rate for contacting the people is 90 to 95%. But that doesn't mean they're going to actually want to, meet you. You can register to be put on a list about whether somebody wants to contact you or whether you want to contact them. And so that's what you can learn if you do a search in Georgia. I'm big on counseling just because so many of my friends did not get this and they knew me. And I said, well, I can't really counsel. I can give you the facts. I can tell you how to reach the person. I said, but I'm not in a position to tell you whether you should or you shouldn't. Because as a genealogist, I'm big in people, finding out their true roots. The website does have a place where you can check on to get a support group. When we get into the DNA, the next segment, they automatically have several DNA angels, they call them, that will help you work this out if you don't know a genealogist. And these people do it for free, but they're sort of a support group / DNA group. You need to have someone on your team who can advise you as you go through the steps. Your research advisor or genealogist may not be in a position to do that. That is why a support group, a minister, is important. The last lady I helped, husband was a minister. She was the one whose mother went to a fertility clinic. And I said, well, you've got a built-in counselor here. What would he tell any of his other parishioners if they came in and said, I want to do this? She jumped right in. She got the birth father's name and she went ahead and has tried to establish contact. Come on in. There are TV shows that often reflect some of the outcomes. The birth family could not want to be in touch, or they could want to be in touch. We got both examples both ways. The birth family could come on too strong, and you may not need that much contact. You may just want to know the facts and say, well, okay, nice to meet you. And some of them could want to, have dinner with you every week. Most people are worried about money. Is somebody going to ask for money and all these? So you need to tell somebody right up front you're only interested in your genealogy and your ethnic story and your birth story and just try to level the playing field right away. The second part of the talk is DNA. And no matter what you do with the Adoption Bureau, you need to do a DNA test. And I'm going to explain to you where I think you ought to do the DNA test at. Most people are jumping on the wrong DNA site. And I'm going to tell you which one is the right one. The DNA does not lie, no matter what you've heard from your adopted people, the adopted parents, the birth parent, whatever you learn, DNA doesn't lie. And a lot of people's story has been changed by the DNA results because some of the other stuff was incorrect. Of the 10 case studies I've worked with, every person using DNA has found at least one birth parent and the story behind the situation. If you're really serious in finding your birth family connections, you need to do your DNA at all the major DNA sites. There are 4 major sites we're going to show in a minute, and you need to do all 4 sites. You can move your DNA around from one site to the other, copy it over if you don't want to spend the $50 to do another test. The 4 sites are Ancestry.com, which has the largest database. We'll show you that in a minute. Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and 23andMe. And you should also use GEDmatch, which is a genealogy site where you can have your results put in and match from different tests. But I still think you should do all 4 tests. In the situation of some cousins who've been adopted out of my family, I've gotten in touch with because they matched me and sort of rejoined the family by matching me. One of the guys has actually found 2 other half-brothers on 2 sites. So had he not been on all 4 DNA sites, he would have missed these other connections. Most people do a DNA test as a lark, Christmas present, wife gives it to them, whatever, and that's how these 2 other half-brothers showed up. So he's glad that he did it on all 4 sites. Now this shows the DNA testing results. This is at the top is my results. Ancestry.com, I have 65,000 matches. And if you look down the list, I have on Family Tree DNA, the next column, I have 8,000. MyHeritage is 13,000. 23andMe caps out at 1,500. And that's the one everybody goes to because it's on TV. Worthless, absolutely worthless as far as matching other people. You may match the match of your life there, but the chances are pretty slim if you only have 1,500 matches and in Ancestry you have 65,000. So pay attention, folks. Ancestry, you've got to do that. The next line down is my mother, who passed away a year ago, but she has 112,000. She has, 50,000 more than me, 40,000 more than me. And of course, I have access to my mother's DNA. The 2 people down on the bottom, the first branch, are both adopted, one into my family, one out of my family. You can see that how many matches they've got on Ancestry. There's MWS, 87,000, and on 23andMe, where he started out, just 1,500. Well, when he got on Ancestry, his birth father was already there. Slam dunk. That's the same one who the birth mother claims she never met, remember? And I put another guy down here, Eric, at the bottom. I just put his because he had done all 4 sites too. And I put their birth dates just to show that my mother being, of course, a generation older, she has more matches. So if you've got anybody in your family, just on regular DNA purposes, the generational thing is a big deal. But in adoption, whoever you're helping needs to do Ancestry.com and essentially all 4, because you could match other people that you're not expecting to match. Using DNA to find a birth family, depending on how you wish to approach your search, DNA may be a quicker route. Several of my friends that I worked with didn't want to go through the Adoption Bureau. I still think they should go back and do that, but they found a significant person on their DNA matches pretty right. And I think my 10 people are a random sampling of people. And I think if it worked for those 10, it's going to work for most everybody. It's very rare nowadays, and that's what the criminals are getting found. It's very rare that somebody in your family fairly close has not done a DNA test. It's going to be somebody out there. It can at least verify information that you got from the Adoption Bureau. Like you may not have the father's information, but this may lead you to. And again, everyone I've helped has found at least one birth family through DNA testing. Everyone that I've helped. And there are several others that are not in the study. The cost of a DNA test varies. There are a lot of sales during holidays. The next sale will be some feedback somewhere. There'll be a sale around Veterans Day. They may throw a Halloween sale, who knows? But the DNA companies like to have sales. You can see if your test you're taking, everybody's going to be taking is autosomal test, which ranges from $79 to $99, and usually it's around $69 when they have a sale. Is that my voice going?
Yes, that's you. Just a minute. Go ahead.
Okay.
It may take a few minutes.
The DNA test results can provide, if you're a male, like my case study DH, when I met with him, I just was sitting him in the Panera Bread, and he said, well, I'm adopted. And I said, well, I've always known you were adopted. He used to work with my parents. And I said, have you done DNA testing? And he said, well, no. So he ordered the test right there on his phone. When he got the Y-DNA test results, he immediately matched two men who were actively doing genealogy. And they took one look at him and said, you must be Uncle George's son. And they knew that Uncle George had gone out to Spokane, Washington during the war as an electrical contractor. So it turned out that when he got his full DNA profile on Ancestry, the birth mother's kin were from Spokane, Washington. So neither man nor woman were from Columbus, Georgia, but that's where this guy was adopted, in Georgia. Both parents were from other states. So that's another thing. Just because you're adopted in one state doesn't mean that's where your parents came from. And we got several examples of that. But if you're a male, you want to do the Y-DNA test and see who you line up with, and that's going to be a major help to sorting it out. Everyone else takes the autosomal test, which every company offers, all four companies, and you'll get a lot of matches, but the main issue is the one at the top, the closest matches. And I'll show you an example in a minute. I'm still seeing an echo. The DNA ethnicity matches, which I think are fairly useless, unless you've got some unusual component. And it turned out the guy I just mentioned, his birth mother's mother was from Russia. So when he did his DNA ethnicity, he had a huge swath of Eastern Europe, which was very unusual, and that's what proved to be the birth mother's line. They're continuing to update the ethnicity profiles. Every site has it, and they're dealing mainly with the reference population, the facts that they've got that they based all these percentages on. Okay, now we've got them. Looks like it's been fixed. So again, case study DH, born in 43 in Georgia. His parents married, but he was the lady that was his birth mother married another man, not the birth father, came to Georgia and gave him up for adoption. Then she went back to Washington State. Okay. This is what my ethnic percentages look like on Ancestry, and you'll see it's a little map on the left. That was March a year ago, and then March of this year, you can see how my percentages have changed. Suddenly, I've lost Sweden. I've gained a little bit more in France. So they're always changing this stuff. So this doesn't really matter at all. It's just fun. I call it cocktail party discussion. Unless you got something wild that you can say, well, this must be one of my birth parents that I don't know anything about. And if you're African American, you should have African American portions of the world shown, but you might have some other unusual things show up too that would be worth pursuing. It's worth looking at, but it's not going to help you find the answer. This is how the DNA results come up on each site. The top match is at the top. This is my mother. She's my closest match on family tree DNA. Because nobody can be closer than your parent, than my sister, and my first cousin. And that just had these little arrows I stuck on here to show all the different things. But if you have a DNA match, the order of your matches is important because the top match will be your closest match. And if you're an adopted person, that's going to be highly significant. THH, my cousin, her top match was her half sister. MWS, his top match was his birth father. One lady I helped, the lady from the sperm bank, her top match was a second cousin of her birth father, because we already had our birth mothers. Her birth mother was alive and had done DNA, so the birth father was the only other option because it didn't match the birth mother. And we found this cousin that was there, only a second cousin, but I followed through with that. Within 6 hours, I found her birth father. And it only took me 6 hours because I had to go off and do some other things. If I'd sat down and just spent 2 or 3 hours straight on, I'd have found it right away. And that'd be an unusual case, but the point is she matched some very unusual names, and it just worked out. They were on Ancestry, and enough people in that family had done the testing. I'm just saying. I know some of my South Alabama cousins have probably not done anything. So if you're kin to them, you may be out of luck. Scenarios at birth. This is what we always understand. And some of y'all are old enough to remember when somebody had a child in high school and didn't come back to high school and the child was adopted out, all this kind of stuff. The birth mother was unwed, is in no position to raise a child too young. The birth mother moved away to have the baby. The state of birth may not be the state of residence of the birth parents. So case study MLH. And there's more than that. That's just one that came to light recently. The birth parents could have married later. One of my cousins did that. They had a child, they put it up for adoption, they later married. They never reclaimed their child. And he knows now, he knows who they are, but he's never joined their family, but he has been with them. The birth mother married someone else, had to put the child up for adoption. That's the 2 men that were born at Fort Benning during the war. Both their birth families from the other side of the country. So the ladies got pregnant by one man, married another man, in the terms of the marriage, I'll marry you, but you got to give the baby up. That's got to be rough. And that happened twice to 2 good friends of mine. The birth parents claim they have never met. That's the same story. And DNA says otherwise. Who do you believe? You believe DNA. Because DNA doesn't lie. And this cousin that's dealing with his birth mother, she talks to him all the time now. And she still hasn't acknowledged ever meeting the birth father. The Foundling Stories. Like in the old days, the man brings home a baby for his wife, said it was found, or someone helped him adopt it. In that case, which is not in the rest of these stories, this lady did a DNA and found out she and her sister were really half-sisters. So the father made up this elaborate story, but he was really the birth father of this girl. And this made all the newspapers when this happened 10 or so years ago. And I'd actually dealt with her earlier than that. Because before the pandemic, I went to a group of people that were adopted. They were trying to, not before the pandemic, before the internet. A long time ago, they had a group that tried to meet and talk about adoption things and how they went about it. And these women would infiltrate Social Security office. They would get a job there so they could look at their files. They got jobs with IRS just long enough to get a file open. One of them went to the courts and got to the court in Miami, and the judge held up the file in front of her and said, "I'll never let you see this file." And on the file was her birth mother's name. But I mean, I remember one lady, she finally got her birth mother's phone number, and she called her up on Thanksgiving Day. And of course, the lady hung up. But the lady, finally she hung up. She found out later, the lady was so shocked. You don't call somebody on Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day. But I all kind of stories from that. And then one member of this group found out that their parents had married into other children. So they just welcomed this person in, just their long lost child. So they're all kind of stories. The second to the last, the birth mother was married to have the child with another man, gave up the child, then married again, had a rocky road. I have 2 cases like that, where when they finally got the story produced, the birth mother just had a rocky relationship with various people. And it's a very sad situation. These people both felt like they were better off being adopted out than having been brought up by a lady who just had a rocky road. That's when I called the birth mother's sister. In that case, I found her. And this is the case study SG. And I called her up and I talked to her briefly. And I said, I told her I was doing a genealogy study of this family. It's an unusual name. And she said, how do you spell it and all this kind of thing. I finally said, well, lady, ma'am, I said, I'm really a genealogist working for, I said, do you remember your sister had a child that she gave away in 1943? And there's a long pause. And this lady was a teenager. And she said, I remember. She said, how's the baby? And I said, well, ma'am, the baby's 65 years old. She's a good friend of mine. She's very accomplished. I said, and then the lady began to describe her sister. And I could tell that she said her sister was very attractive, looked like a movie star. And of course, I thought the daughter of my friend looked very attractive in that same sort of vein. And she said, I'll talk to her if she'll call me. So they did. They got in touch. But I had to do the So sometimes you as the consultant may have to be the one to make the first approach to somebody just so you can make sure that you level the playing field. Because a lot of people are adopted, don't know anything about research. They've never looked at records because they don't have any genealogy. See, so they have no idea that records are there, what's online, and how much of this stuff is tied together now with obituaries online, newspapers.com, Find a Grave. You just can't imagine how much stuff just comes together nowadays. And then the last one, if the student, if you were in high school, you had to drop out of school in Georgia. Some people left town to have their baby. They were able to cover up. So so-and-so went off to see their aunt for the summer. The child was out of wedlock. That was not acceptable in those days. And of course, the lady might come back, but she never came back to the public school system. She always had to go otherwise to finish her education. The man, of course, could come back to school. Nobody said anything about the man. The men have always gotten off the hook pretty easily. And most of the men I've dealt with have denied having a child, even though DNA says it's their child. So these are my 10 case studies that I've mentioned throughout this. We're going to get into some more detail in a second. I put them in the order they were born, but then I realized I missed somebody's birthday, so I got them out of order. One lady was adopted in New Jersey. Most of them in Georgia, one in Alabama, another in New Jersey, and one in South Carolina. Two of them got their original birth certificates, again, without any counseling. One is the lady from Alabama I just mentioned, who I met, talked to the aunt. Adoption Bureau, several of them did go through the Bureau and did meet their birth family through that. Several of them did not do it. My cousin THH is still pending because she's the one that's done it all the wrong way. And then the lady at the bottom is not adopted. She's the one that was from the fertility clinic, so she had no file to go to because she wasn't adopted. She was just artificial insemination. And then on DNA, everybody's met their birth parent either through the birth certificate search or through the DNA. But you see, everybody that's done DNA has made contact. That's the whole point. Everybody that's done DNA has made contact. So that's why you got to go the DNA route. No matter what you think, you're going to be related to somebody that's done DNA. The variables per case, the state you're adopted in, procedures, what they'll provide and what they won't provide. I have no idea on all the states. There are a lot of success stories. I know a lot of states are still harboring on keeping the records locked up. And Georgia did that until 1997 when they did change the rules. In what era were you adopted? Like we talked about Leroy's case a long time ago. When were the real records sealed? I had one of the people that helped me with one of my loans on my property. Her father had been adopted and he had a watch that came with him, and all that was in the courthouse, but it was like in the 1920s. So there was no adoption file. She just went to the courthouse and looked him up and they were there. Some of the Alabama records are that way. And they know who the parents were. They just decide to give the child for adoption. It's all in the records. So it could be in the courthouse, and a lot of people just never looked further back. The age of the birth parents differ. Were they wealthy or poor? How was the adoption handled? Are the birth parents from the United States or from overseas? Now, you may not have much of a DNA match if your birth parent was from overseas. That's a possibility. And the lady I just helped from the fertility clinic, her birth father's father turned out to be from Europe. So there was really no DNA matches related to the birth father's father. So that cut out a whole bunch of people. But his mother's DNA was on there, and that's how we found him. But there was a lot of gap because his own father was from overseas. Then the DNA testing volume is already mentioned. We go to the sites with the most tests. Case studies, part one. The two that got their original birth certificate, SG from Alabama, found a birth mother story because we did the genealogy and found out people related to as a very unusual name. She's never learned who her birth father was, and she's also not done any DNA. And I talked to her last week. She's 79. I wanted to say, well, how much longer are you going to wait? You know, she's met her half sister. Her mother had other children, but she gave this one up. LS, the guy that's in my fraternity, younger kid, he got the original located, but he's not done DNA, so he's not found anything on his birth mother. He hasn't contacted the agency. He's sort of halfway there. The boys went through the agency, DMS. He paid the fee, produced his birth mother. He met her, and she died a month later. She told him who his father was. He got in touch with the father. Father didn't want to have anything to do with it, which is pretty rough because my friend is a very accomplished person. And then he's not done DNA either. And then MLH, she paid the fee. She got her birth parents. They were from other states, although she was adopted here in Georgia through DNA. Now, she cautions everybody. I've talked to her. She cautions everybody that DNA came up with more than the cousinship. The relationship to her was a little bit confusing on the DNA matching. She said that's why you need the non-identifying information from the state agency, so it helps you sort out who the birth parent is if you got more than one person involved, more than one match, or you're not sure which generation you're matching with. Okay. Case studies part 2. Those that got the non-identifying information, BT, that's my first case. Via DNA, she matched relatives, close relatives who've done genealogy on both her birth parents. So she met her birth family in the first month because she did DNA, and she had already had her file opened. And when I saw the non-identifying information, it matched exactly her family, because by that time I knew who her birth mother was and I knew who her birth father was. And it was clearly there. But you have to know, the names are not there, but you know the family profile, the occupation, the age of the younger siblings, and you match it with the DNA, you know you're on the right path. MWS is the one I said whose parents still don't admit ever meeting each other, although both are living. And in BT's case, both her birth parents are living, but they have not chosen to meet her either. On the other side, DH, he's the one who's from Spokane. That's where his birth parents met. But DNA has produced links to both sides of the family. MWS, again, he's found 2 half-brothers from the same birth father. So there's more out there than the birth father imagined. Obviously, the birth father wasn't very cautious, didn't give a rip, and we don't really know how many more people may show up. One of the half-brothers is actually in Germany and was a product of a military family, and the lady went overseas to give birth to him, so he's German. And somehow he met a girl from Warm Springs, Georgia. Figure that one out. So he's come back around to his roots. And THH, my cousin, I've got her birth date wrong there. She's actually born in 1953. She's matched her half sister, and when she on Ancestry, when she contacted her half sister, the sister said, "I did DNA. I'm waiting for you to call. I knew at some point you would be looking for us." She said, "I named my daughter for the name mother gave you before she put you up for adoption." That just sends chills through your spine when my cousin heard that. And of course, this lady was 16 when my cousin was born, and so she knew enough about what was going on. But again, my cousin that's adopted out, she doesn't know enough about research. I said, well, surely this woman must know something about the birth father. What was her mother doing? Was she going to bars? You know, was she a prostitute? I mean, what was the story? So the girl doesn't know how to interview and ask the question. So I need to go back to this woman and say, what do you, but I found through DNA who the birth father has to be. But they're 2 men, father and son. Either one of them could be the birth, because the birth mother was older. This goes back to the health information question. I don't think an 18-year-old or certainly a 16-year-old girl is going to know a whole lot about the health history of their family. So you may be thinking you're going to get health stuff from the Adoption Bureau. And I've read these 2 files that I've been seeing, and, you know, they may say things, but they only say, how many people when you're 16 knew that your grandmother had breast cancer or something? I mean, you may not know any of this kind of stuff. So that's not a good arbiter that the family doesn't have some underlying problem. That's why you need to meet the actual people and say, I need to know what's been going on. And even then, this cousin of mine, that's the birth father, he said, well, I should tell him that I've had prostate cancer. He didn't bother to do that. I told the guy. I said, you need to know that. But his birth father won't, he just won't lift a finger to do anything. Okay, so in THH's case, we think we know who the birth parents are. We know who the birth father is probably. We just don't know how to prove it without, other than just saying DNA has proven it. The TV show, some can be helpful. The one called Long Lost Family. Has anybody seen that? It's on the TLC network. Nobody's seen that show. It's a great show. What? Okay. It's still on. And you can always look all these shows up on TV, but they have people that are adopted or the counselors. So they're adopted people themselves, and they're going around helping people. And they're always trying to get people to meet. Of course, I guess if people throw a hissy fit, they don't show them on there. But everybody's quite nice and gives you a big hug. And enough time has passed that they forgive everybody. But of course, they do instantaneous research and find everybody in 2 seconds, which is possible if you got the resources of ancestry.com and some of these other sites that I've never even paid to use that can find information on people's taxes and stuff like that. And I said before, adoptees are not familiar with research. That goes to the sake of any layperson who's never done any research. When I gave a class at Emory years ago, I said, well, there are books on, if you go to the state archives, there are books on the marriages and the wills and the deeds of these different counties. And they said, don't tell me that can't be true. So people that are not into research have no clue what's out there and what's online now and how you can put all these things together. They're going to need help with DNA results. And you can either go with a local genealogist or someone you know, or groups like on the next slide, these adoption angels we're talking about. If you're the adopted person or helping the person, you need to assist on a report so you know how they found the people, did they do it a legitimate way, and why they think the DNA matches these people. You need that written down, especially if you pay somebody. You need to have a report. Another lady who's not part of my case studies, I just happened to find a letter in my files from her the other day, and she used this group called the WikiTree Adoption Angels. And she found them very nice. You register for free, and they helped her quite a bit when she went to them a few years ago. She had to wait about a month before they had whoever was in her was going to help her came around. And this other group I just found online called DNA Angels. But I think that's the one I put in the handout. I may have put them both in there. Yes, ma'am. There's a lot of other groups. I know that. DNA Detective is another good one. There are lots of them. The main thing is find one that you can guarantee that will help you. You have a good track record. And if you know somebody local, that's okay, but it doesn't hurt to have somebody like this involved. This is a book I brought, my copy of Adoptees Guide to DNA Testing that came out, was 4 years ago now. It's got a lot of good case studies in there, and it might be worthwhile if you're dealing with somebody to have them get that book. It's right here. Pretty thick book. But it's a guide to DNA testing for adopted people. So and this is the same people that put out the guide to DNA as well. DNA guide. And then, remember, if adopted, you have a right to know the birth information and especially your health history, but you don't have the right to disrupt the lives of others. Many may not know of your existence. And the people I talked about, they're in my family. I had no clue that there were these children that were adopted out. You should follow any rules, instructions established by whomever's helping you. Don't make contact without their guidance, or perhaps they're contacting the person first. One lady that I started off with, she really broke the rules one night when she went on Facebook and told my cousin's child that she was his half sister, and he didn't believe her to call me. And he came out of the movie theater to call me. What are you going to tell a guy? And he's 35 years old. He's not a baby. But I was really ticked off that she had done that. She had broken the rules. Not that we'd set any rules, but just by law of averages, just because she couldn't get the birth father's attention, so she goes to his children. Very not good. I just refused to deal with her after that. She's a DNA match, and every time I turn on my DNA, she's there. And that's why I cut my mother's page off right there, because the next person down is her. So if these cousins didn't know and they did a DNA test, their half sister would be right there on top. So that's what I'm saying. People can show up that you're not expecting. Remember, you have only one chance to make a first impression with these original relatives. And I get the testimonial from one of the people that I'm closest to, that I've helped quite a bit. And this is what he says. It has meant a lot to me to get some answers, even though sometimes I wonder about the reaction of my birth parents. They're the ones that won't claim they've ever met each other. It has been nice to see pictures of my original family, always knowing that I always knew that I was adopted. I've always wondered what it was like to see people that I looked like. I'm not sure I've gotten it from an agency. It's not a lie when I say that growing up as an only child, I always wanted brothers and sisters. I do wish that I could form some type of relationship with his half-brothers that he's met through DNA. I found, but circumstances right now in distance, because he's the one that's got the half-brother in Germany. One final thing, and I'm very thankful for the contacts I've made through the websites with family and the stories I've learned. I've yet to actually meet my mother or my father, and that's okay. How would you feel if you knew your birth parents were still living, relatively healthy, and won't meet you? I didn't go into this looking to replace the ones I had. I think that this made a difference to me compared to others. One must be prepared for what they find or the relationships they don't. It's his final. He just wrote this 2 days ago. So that just shows how deep it means to some people. If you read his Facebook account, you'd know that when he first found this out, he wrote this unbelievable statement. I just shook him to the core to know how, once he finally did DNA, how quickly he found his story. Of course, he matched me, which didn't hurt, because I was able to help him right away. Okay, that's the end of the formal presentation. I did bring 2 of my other books I did on Columbus, Georgia, and Fort Benning for you might see those. And now we have some questions. Yes, sir.
I had a friend of mine, I think his grandfather was on the children's train.
Yeah.
First thing I helped him to find some information.
What part of the state country was he from?
Understood.
He was on the children's train from where?
Where the train was from, he doesn't know.
I never heard of him by coming to Georgia, but I know they had children's trains around the country. You need to do some Google search and you'll find some stories, because they've had several lectures at the National Genealogy Conference on the children's trains. I don't know whether those kids were adopted at the end of the line or not.
I figured they were just filling out the families and
Probably so.
they just took the name of the family.
Well, a DNA test would let him know something. Well, if he doesn't follow through, then forget him. If they're not going to follow through, you just can't work with them. That's the way it is. I know. That's the story. The point is, there's a chance to figure out something. And the chance of anybody that's living having a DNA match is pretty good. And if somebody doesn't want to go that far, just like I have 2 first cousins that are adopted, and they won't approach it. They never asked me to help them. And that's it. They're 60-something years old, and that's fine. They love my aunt and uncle, and they don't really want to know the background. That's okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm here from Dallas, Texas. To be a part of it. This is my cousin that found me through Ancestry.
Great.
And so we are, last night we stayed up late because she's a researcher. And I got adopted in Dallas, Hope College. I was born in 1955.
Okay.
I'm not for sure of the age of adoption because I was not adopted at birth.
Well, what's your file say?
I've never ever thought to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going now, since I've heard the rules, I'm going back. Now I didn't know that if you were not adopted at birth, you have a birth certificate. If you are, replaced.
Yeah.
If you was, birthed and then went home with that parent.
Yeah.
Then the birth certificate turns to that adopted parent.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like that. So I'm going back home because I didn't know about an adoption agency.
Well, every state has an adoption.
But I never heard of that. I never knew
Well,
to go and look. So what my things is that my first, I need to ask you, what is my first thing when I go back to Dallas? Do I contact Hope College or do I hope through the courts? Because my adopted mother, for some reason, I have never ever. I asked her, but I'm 67, and so I asked, and I can never get a response.
Okay.
So I need
whatever your birth certificate says.
I don't.
What's on your birth certificate?
The birth certificate states my adopted.
As your but they had to issue that at the state level. So you got to go to the state agency and have them look at your file and see what Texas law allows them to give you. So that's where your file is at the state of Texas adoption, whatever it's called. So look at their website,
State of Texas Adoption Agency.
whatever it's called. It's through Vital Records. It's where they file birth and death certificates. So it's called the, Georgia's called the Bureau of, what do they call it, Kelly?
Okay, I know where that is.
Yeah, that's where you need to, Vital Records.
It's that's gonna be the old courthouse. I know where that is.
Well, go there and start with them and just tell them, you know you're adopted, you've got your adopted certificate. You want to approach the state agency and find out what they will tell you. And look on their website to see, like I showed the Georgia stuff. You need to see what's on the state of Texas adoption website. Central Adoption Registry, Steve says, from Texas.
Run by the
Okay, I know where that is.
Because the Georgia, adoption registry that's one out of DFACS, isn't it? Department of Family and Children's Services.
It's whatever. It's on the. It's a contract. The Georgia group is a contract private group that does this, and how it works it out. It's the place you got to go in Georgia.
Okay, so that's my first step, and then I go.
Yeah.
Like that.
This is exciting. Maybe you'll get some answers.
Well, we.
Well, I'm glad you got your genealogy consultant right there. That's good. Okay. Okay. Well, I've certainly helped the cousins that turned up that were adopted out of our family. That's some of these people I've helped, and they appreciate it. And it's given me a learning experience to work with people as to what the possibilities are. I think you'll be successful. The main thing is at least you were legally adopted. So at least there's a potential of a file being there.
Yes, yes. I know that point, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of go back and see if I do have something on record. I know that a name is not going to be on that birth certificate, but
It all depends. Look at New Jersey. They gave Larry his original certificate. So it all depends on the state. I mean, there are things that are different in Tennessee. I noticed looking online that Louisiana just issued some kind of new decree. It all depends on the state and what pressure they're under to open their records. But see, to me, if all the records were wide open, you're still sitting there, how are you going to figure this out? You still got to do something else to sort it all out. Or hire somebody to help you sort it out. Some other questions? Leroy?
What do you do when somebody calls you and says, why does your DNA match mine?
Well, you work with them and say, how close a match are we? Some people apparently grasp at every DNA match, and you really have to. You have to look at them. And I mean, I've had people approach me. I say, well, you're really quite a distant match. And I tell people, unless your centimorgans are 65 or higher, it's really not worth it to me to worry about you. Now, I had a guy the other day that showed up, and I inadvertently wrote him and said, hello, or whatever you say, automatic thing. And he was very excited because I was the first person to respond to him. He's not into genealogy, but he's a very close match. So he's worth pursuing because he's matching me and my second cousin. And I said, you need to go and do your DNA at another site before I'll take it seriously because there are not more people in this other site. So the point is, he is a closer match and he's worth pursuing. Plus our family knows him. And I thought, we need to figure this out. Do we invite him to Thanksgiving dinner or not? How close? But some people just are desperate. Some of these people, especially some real young people, don't know anything about DNA. And they just write everybody. One lady wrote me from Paris one time. She's obviously the product of an American and a Vietnamese, most likely, because she was born in Vietnam, but she's got a French name. Vietnam used to be French. And I said, well, you just too distant. I said, there's no way to figure this out. So some people just jump too quickly. All right.
Let's talk this year.
Sure.
Find out he gave him away. Mother gave him away at birth. So
he got adopted by his family, but it's a closed adoption. Both of the adopted parents are deceased, but there's a sister, his adopted sister.
Mhm.
So she's going to help him, but wanted to say, so me and him are 200 cinnamonies.
That's good.
So what I did was, I did I got him up on Ancestry. I did the shared map,
Mhm.
and he's on my father's side.
Okay.
So, I let him know that. But I also told him, now I'm going to tell him, he's got to go to the adoption agency.
Mhm.
Right. They got to go.
And that would be real helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is it's in Connecticut, so I don't know.
Well, just check them out, see what they'll do.
Yeah.
And the main thing that would help produce the birth mother's people. Since you know you're kin to the birth father, that would help him.
Yeah.
Because if the birth mother could still be living. I mean, they could make it. I don't know how it works when they contact a family and the birth parents are dead. What happens after that? That's what I haven't actually learned from anybody. Yeah, but the birth mother could be alive.
Right, because in 1978.
Oh, yeah.
76.
Very likely they're still living. Well, good. I'm glad you're helping. You're on the right track. Yes, ma'am.
So this is a curious question. If you were born because there was an egg donor, but it was your father's
Uh-huh.
sperm, and your mother, who was married to the father, had the baby, so in vitro, who is the birth mother, the donor or the woman that gave birth to the child?
It's whosever egg it was.
Yeah, okay, all right. So whoever egg it was, that's considered the birth mother.
To me, a genealogist is only worried about the genetic connection, the social
So
connection.
were they on the birth certificate? Maybe it depends on the state who's listed as the
Mhm.
mother and whether that child is considered adopted or not.
That's another point. Yeah. Can't help you there. That's getting a little bit too. I just don't understand those situations. I have not dealt with any of those people. Josh?
And my sister-in-law was adopted. She was born in 1936 in West Virginia. And my niece has had some help from a DNA angel.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's that far back, there are many possibilities in terms of potential matches. And I'm wondering, do you have any experience using leads or any other techniques? Leads, LEEDS. Because that's what the DNA angel.
But that's why the angels are good, because they can go further and more advanced, and they have more resources. The lady behind you had.
I'm Stephanie Powers. So the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, the DNA SIG group, and I just happen to be a facilitator. So we get a lot of people that are adopted, and they ask us that very question.
Mm-hmm.
They get their DNA match, and they're trying to figure out how to. And it's not that easy. It's not as easy for some people. Some people have a lot of relatives that are tested, and so they have a lot of matches. But the advanced tools are available, so they can help you figure out which lines of families you come from. It is not always as easy as some of the examples.
I agree. Mine have been real lucky, but
They're very lucky. Some people, they have no real matches. It's always different. Every family is different. Those tools come in specific family groups.
and there are several. The Cobb County Genealogical Society has the DNA SIG group, special interest group. The Central Georgia Society out of Warner Robins has a DNA group that meets periodically. So you have a lot of groups in the metro area that could give you some advice, and again, just sharing people's experiences about the different, the DNA angels that have helped people, and who all has helped each other.
I do have a question for you.
Okay.
A lot of the comments you made where people don't seem to want. Yes. What do you attribute that to? Do you think they're just not serious, or they're afraid what they might find?
I don't know, because this has all been going on the last 6 years, 5 or 6 years. People say they want to know, And then when you finally say, okay, we can do it, let's do it, let's sit down, let's get a DNA test, let's get moving, then they don't want to know. Not as easy to think about the past. And I have talked again with everybody I just mentioned this week. Some of them I'm always talking, but I asked different ones how they were doing. That's when I was sort of stunned that they had not proceeded on. Like the guy from New Jersey who got his birth certificate. And I thought, well, hell, that's better than most people getting. We figured out the birth father because he'd actually been killed. And it was in the newspaper.
To a certain point, and then they get cold feet.
They get cold feet. But Larry just didn't proceed on. He didn't get back with me. And he knew I would help him. So then I wrote him, I said, Larry, let's go do DNA and let's see what happens. And go back to New Jersey. And you got 2 or 3 pieces you've missed. But I don't know what it is. Cold feet's a good example. People may watch a TV show and realize it could be either way.
I can also see where, okay, you get a name, and then all of a sudden it's more real and more immediate. And then the thought of taking that step to actually meet the people in the family, that's I think where the cold feet come in.
Sometimes people are resistant because they're afraid this person who shows up is out for money, inheritance, share of something.
And some of them may be, none of the people I've talked to have gotten that far to where they ever, even came up with a discussion. I can see where that would worry a lot of people. One of the birth fathers I spoke to was a lawyer. And I had to be real cagey telling him, because he talked in legal terms. He never said, oh yeah, that was my high school girlfriend. Well, we knew it was. But he just said, and then he turned to me, his cousin, and he said, I don't authorize you to tell her anything. So that's sort of like a lawyer telling your client, hey, don't say anything. So I didn't. But that's the woman that jumped the line and Facebooked his son. So I said, well, she's broken the line too. But on the point is, if I were a person that I knew my birth parents were living, and if they had treated me this way, I don't know what I would do. I think I'd go camp out and just say, how can you reject me when you were having a romance with my mother? It wasn't like a one-night stand. It's clearly a romance. I'm sure if you had the social columns, they win the social column. And all of a sudden, it blows wide open. She gets pregnant. He drops her. She has to go have the baby, drops out of school, and he goes on to his career. And then all these years later, a 60-year-old woman pops up, and she's the daughter. And he knew good and well what had happened. This was not a cover-up. He changed girlfriends, and I'm sure his first wife probably knows. I never asked her. She's still around. But and I like his children a lot, and I think that he's keeping this secret from his other children. And she's already jumped in the line to talk to one of them. So who knows? You just don't know. And of course, I don't know what I would do if this, somebody happened and said, I want to meet people. But there are all kinds of scenarios as to why people don't do it, don't proceed. They don't want to be hurt. What else? All right. I hope this has been helpful to everybody, and hope you'll learn something. This will be on YouTube in a week or so.
Yes. So
you can share it with other people. YouTube channel with the archives is free. And it's worth letting people know the lecture's there. And if anybody gives any other suggestions, my email is on the handout. You can email me with some other thoughts or some site that worked for you. And we'll be glad to incorporate it anytime I give this in the future. All right. Thank you.